Good evening, guys. I am Robson. I am here with Nathan to talk about the medieval atmosphere, the Gothic revival in architecture and literature. So, to start talking about the meaning of the word Gothic, we know that Gothic has multiple meanings depending on the context in which it is used. Historically, it can refer to the culture, architecture, and art associated with the Goths, uh, in a barbaric way that Germanic people were who played a role in the Western Roman Empire. In architecture, Gothic describes a style, a different and specific style. So the meaning has to do with this. And the first coined uh, term of Gothic was made by Italian writers in the later Renaissance period that was dated between the late 15th to early 7th century.
So now I'm gonna talk about the period itself of the Gothic revival, also known as Neo-Gothic. And so the Gothic style of architecture was very present during the European Middle Ages, with all the pointed arches, soaring vaults, and all the gargoyles, stained glass windows. However, it went quite deeply out of fashion during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, replaced by a classically inspired vocabulary that was better suited for those eras' worldviews. Considered backward and superstitious, everything to do with the medieval period generally fell into disfavor for several centuries. In 18th century England, however, a group of thinkers began to appreciate the Middle Ages again. Their enthusiasm led to a full-scale Gothic revival in art, architecture, literature, philosophy, and more. This revival spread throughout the world, and its results continue to shape our cultural landscape. This Gothic revival is closely related to Romanticism, an 18th and 19th century movement embracing the subjectivity and emotion that had been suppressed under the rigorously logical Enlightenment. To educate Europeans, the Middle Ages had long represented a time of ignorance and credulity that prioritized religion and superstition over science. To the Romantics, on the other hand, these qualities were seen as good things. And now to talk about the architecture itself. Gothic revival is best known and most visible today as an architectural style. Its buildings take on many different appearances, from essentially modern constructions with sporadic Gothic elements to elaborate structures borrowing closely from surviving medieval buildings. Some remain faithful to their Gothic predecessors, while others marry Gothic with local or modern aesthetics, materials, and motifs to create something new from an old architectural vocabulary. While a few examples may manage convincing airs of antiquity, most betray their relative use in one way or another. Gothic revival buildings tend to reflect 19th century views of the Middle Ages, which don't necessarily represent the Middle Ages itself. The original Gothic took on slightly different characteristics in different nations. So Gothic revival architects looked to France, England, Italy, and Germany for a variety of approaches to draw from. However, most Gothic revival buildings include at least a few of the most recognizable Gothic elements. These include pointed or ogee arches, tracery, rose windows, river fan vaults, often with extra ribs for decoration, pinnacles, crockets, gargoyles, or grotesque and other carved decorations. Yet so-called Gothic revival buildings may also employ non-Gothic medieval motifs, including castle-like crenellations, fanciful towers and turrets, and Romanesque roundel arches or monumental masonry. In the United States, architect Henry Robson Richardson started a taste for Romanesque-style public and private buildings, often termed Richardsonian Romanesque.
So the Gothic literature. The Gothic revival and other medieval revivals had strong literary components too. The Gothic novel, a forerunner of the horror movie, and typically set in a foreboding Gothic ruin, came about at this time. In fact, two of the Gothic revival's earliest advocates were authors. Horace Walpole, for example, wrote the first Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto, while living in one of the earliest Gothic revival mansions. We also have the Scottish author Sir Walter Scott, who created the now popular historical fiction genre through his Warley novels. And the Gothic revival tradition also inspired the still popular masterpieces uh, Frankenstein from Mary Shelley and Dracula from Bram Stoker, as well as painted equivalents like Henry Fuseli's Nightmare. You can show the painting, Nathan. Yeah. Now come back to the yeah. Gothic literature, a genre with roots in the late 18th century, presents a compelling interplay of darkness, mystery, and the supernatural. This genre emerged as a reaction to the Enlightenment, a period, as we know, marked by rationalism and the emphasis on reason and things like that. In contrast, Gothic literature embraced elements of the irrational and emotional, providing a unique and unsettling experience for its readers. In Gothic stories, the places where the events happen are often scary and old. They include broken castles, dark underground tombs, and faraway empty houses. These places make the stories feel spooky and full of danger, setting the scene for the stories, and this is kind of a hallmark of Gothic literature. In Gothic tales, strange and magical things are important elements in the genre. You might find, for example, in those Gothic tales, you might find ghosts, vampires, werewolves, and other creatures in these stories. And these supernatural elements, they mix with the real world, making the stories seems mysterious and a bit unsettling. And those Gothic stories also focus on characters feeling very anxious and troubled, all that to create a psychological tension, the feeling of a psychological tension. The characters might go a little crazy or become obsessed with something, and this reflects the outside dangers and scary things happening to them. The stories look into the darkest parts of the human mind, and this is also a mark uh, of the Gothic to delve into the deepest corners of the human psyche. We see that, for example, in the Frankenstein. Uh, we had the castle of Otranto, which is some of the most Gothic works. Sorry, but we also have Frankenstein, as I said, or the modern Prometheus, which is a novel written by Mary Shelley that is often regarded as a classic of both Gothic and science fiction literature. It is a interesting fact that some people say that Frankenstein is actually the first science fiction work in the history. So the novel tells the story of Victor Frankenstein. Just to give a little context. Uh, the novel tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist consumed by the idea of creating a life. And if you read the book, you know that he eventually succeeds in bringing a creature to life, but recoils in horror at its appearance, uh, the monster, the appearance of the monster. And this creature, often referred to as Frankenstein monster, is left to navigate the world alone, leading to a series of tragic events. And the narrative explores themes of scientific ambition, ethical responsibility, isolation, and the consequences of tampering with the forces of nature. And it's very nice that the setting of the story spans various locations, including Geneva, the Swiss Alps, and the Orkney Island. All that to contribute to the novel's atmosphere of isolation and also desolation, loneliness. One notable aspect of the novel is its epistolary structure, which presents the story through a series of letters and narratives. And Frankenstein delves into a range of themes, including the ethical dilemmas of scientific ambition, as I said, the ethical responsibility, the consequences of abandonment and isolation, and the nature of monstrosity. It also raises questions about what it means to be human and the implications of playing with the natural order. And the legacy of the novel is profound, influencing literature, films, and popular culture in general. The character of Frankenstein monster has become an enduring symbol of the tragic outsider. Numerous adaptations, both in literature and film, have explored different facets of the story and its characters. Frankenstein remains as a significant work in both Gothic and science fiction literature, known for its exploration of deep philosophical and ethical questions, and continues to be widely read and discussed.
So now I wanted to talk about how this revival of the Gothic style became a worldwide phenomenon. Gothic revival spread quickly beyond its European origins, arriving in countries with no Gothic tradition of their own. It particularly flourished in places with cultural or colonial ties to the British Empire. One can find examples on practically every continent today, because Gothic has always been most closely associated with churches. It became the go-to style for both Catholic and Protestant church construction throughout the world. Gothic also enjoys an association with colleges and other places of learning, because Europe's earliest universities were founded during the same period that the Gothic style was current. The fact that Gothic remains emblematic of both Christianity and higher education is largely due to countless Gothic revival examples of both institutions. However, the Gothic revival has also been used for many other functions, including public buildings like libraries and train stations, and private homes both grand and modest. At first, only wealthy families could afford to live out their medieval fantasies in pretend castle or monastery mansions. Eventually, even homeowners of average means could live in houses with a few Gothic details. In the United States, wooden homes with Gothic decorative elements are sometimes called Carpenter Gothic. This style even appears in Grant Wood's famous painting American Gothic, which I will show you later, whose title comes from the single lancet window visible on the white wooden house, which is the painting I was talking about. And so in Brazil, Gothic elements were only starting to be implemented in this Neo-Gothic period, and can be seen mainly through great cathedrals like the Petrópolis Cathedral, the Catedral Metropolitana de São Paulo, and some other historical buildings. And although there may not be as many pieces as the European continent, it is still possible to find the ideas of the movement scattered throughout the country.
And the legacy of Gothic revival. It's rare to see new Gothic revivals buildings being constructed today. Like most other historicist architecture styles, it did not survive the coming of modernist architecture in the first decades of the 20th century. However, Gothic revival buildings abound, especially in Great Britain, Europe, and North America. We don't build in the style of Gothic revival anymore, but many of us still live, work, worship, and study in those buildings. And similarly, we continue, we continue to enjoy the movement's legacy in pop culture, for example, literature, in the academia, in the fashion, and more. We read historical fiction novels. We watch movies set in the Middle Ages. We study medieval story, adapt medieval European mythology into modern stories. And we consume music and design inspired by medieval precedents. Meanwhile, Gothic churches are some of Europe's most popular tourist attractions. We owe all of this enjoyment to the Gothic revivalists and other romantics. They saw the value of medieval culture in a way that their ancestors had not. Pode? Isso. And as we can see, the two examples of Nosferatu and the Addams Family, two great movies who influenced a lot, who influenced a few generations and continue to influence more. I think that's it. We are done for the day, and we thank you for listening.
Thank you, everyone.